In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to use Photoshop to add a tilt-shift miniature effect to a photograph. Now, this technique works best on images that are photographed kind of from high up. In this example, I have an image of Halong Bay in Vietnam, where I hiked up to the top of this kind of viewpoint area and photographed the bay with all of these boats in the water. So here I'm going to make this look like kind of miniaturized boats. So let's go ahead and get started. So I have this image opened up into Photoshop, just a standard layer. And when I do any type of really kind of in-depth or intense filter effects, I like to be able to go back and maybe re-edit those effects. If I were to just start adding filters to this image, then all of those effects would kind of be locked into that layer and I wouldn't be able to make any adjustments afterwards. So the way to kind of get around that is to convert this layer into a smart object. I'll do that by going over to the layer in the Layers panel. I'm going to right-click and select Convert to Smart Object. You can see now there's a little icon in the bottom right of that thumbnail icon, and it is no longer a locked layer. All right, now let's go ahead and add the blur effect. I'm going to go up to Filter, Blur Gallery, Tilt Shift. So right away, the filter is going to apply just a very standard and basic tilt shift effect. But of course, I'm going to customize this so it works better with this photograph. So just real quickly to review some of the things you can do here. It can be changed and resized individually. This right here is going to adjust the feather of that blur. When I move it all the way down, there's a very kind of a harsh transition between the non-blurred area and the blur. And the farther up that goes, it kind of spreads out that transition. This center area here is where your in focus part is going to be. And you can also resize that area as well. Now I'm going to relocate this so it's over the part that I want to be in focus. So I'm just going to click on that center part and drag it down over those boats. I'm also going to rotate it, and I can do that by going up to this main area until that cursor changes into kind of a curved double arrow. And then I'll just click and drag it, and I'm just going to kind of move it so it's moving that focus area over those little boats. I'd also like to see the top part feathered a little bit more, so I'm going to drag that dash line up. But on the bottom, I'm going to find that dash line and I'm going to move it closer to that focus area so there's a little bit more of a kind of a harsh transition there from the foreground area to make that a little bit more blurry. I think I'm even going to kind of resize it just a little bit there. And I'm going to move the top up a little bit as well. Okay, so I have the focus area kind of set and everything is in place, but I'm not finished yet. I want to make a few more adjustments to some of the sliders over on the right. Now, because I have everything kind of in position over the actual image, all of these lines and these overlays are kind of going to be a distraction. So I'm going to hide those. And to hide those, you go up to View, Extras, and make sure that Extras is unchecked. And you can also use that keyboard shortcut as well. Now I can see the image a little bit more clearly, so I can change the blur and I'll have a better idea of what it looks like. So in the panel on the right, I'm just going to increase the blur, and I'm watching my image as I'm doing it just to see if I can find a good amount. I don't want it to be too intense. You can see it really starts to get kind of crazy if you move it too far. So I'm probably going to keep it somewhere around 30 pixels for this image. I'm not going to play with that distortion at all, but I am going to go down to the noise section. I'm going to add some grain. Let me zoom in. I'm going to use the keyboard shortcut Command or Control Plus to zoom into that area. And I'll hold my spacebar down to kind of move my view. If you look in some of the areas that are in focus, there's just a kind of a basic grain pattern, just what came out of my camera. And, that's pretty common for most cameras to have some type of grain. And of course, it's going to depend on your ISO setting as well. But up in the blurred areas, all of that grain is kind of smudged out. To bring back some of the realism of this photograph, I want to make sure that the blurred areas also have a bit of grain added to them. So I'm going to increase the amount slider. And as I'm doing it, I'm just watching the screen and I'm just kind of visually eyeballing the amount of grain in the blurred area and comparing it with the grain in the in-focus area. And it didn't take much. It was about 15% or so, and I think that did a pretty good job. So I'm finished with this here. I'm going to go ahead and click OK at the top. And this will apply that blur to my smart object. Let me just show you real quickly why the smart object is so powerful. First, I can toggle that blur gallery on and off if I want to kind of see that effect before and after. But the real benefit is the ability to go back into that blur gallery and actually make some changes if I wanted to. And to do that, you just double click on that blur gallery filter and it brings me right back into that blur gallery setting. I don't need to make any changes here, but it's just nice to have that feature. It gives you the ability to just go back and reduce the amount of blur, increase the amount of blur, change that grain setting, etc. I'll go ahead and click cancel to go back to my image. So I've basically added the tilt shift kind of miniaturized effect. But a lot of these images are also going to have a few more qualities added to them. Usually it's going to be in the form of more saturation or more vibrance. So up in the adjustments panel, I'm going to go ahead and click on the vibrance setting. I'm going to increase the vibrance slider, and I'm just watching my photo as I do it. Sometimes I like to go too extreme, so I went all the way to 100 there, and now I'm just kind of sliding it back, and I ended up at a setting of about 25, 26. And I'm going to do the same with saturation. Now, saturation is probably going to be a little bit more intense, so if I were to move this all the way to 100, it's going to really overdo those colors. So I'll bring it back about the same as the vibrance. I'll toggle that setting on and off to see how it looks. I might even increase the vibrance and saturation a touch more. I'll toggle that on and off to see how it looks. And that's looking pretty good. It really enhanced and intensified those colors. I'm also going to add a vignette to this. So I like to do that by kind of a dodge and burn effect with the lens correction filter. So what I'll do over in the layers panel, I'm going to add a new blank layer. Then I'm going to fill this layer with gray. And I do that by holding the Shift key, and then I press Delete. That brings up the Fill dialog box. Make sure I have 50% gray checked, and I'll click OK. Now I'll go up to Filter, Lens Correction. Over on the right, go to Custom, go down to the vignette, decrease the amount so I get a nice dark vignette. And I'm also going to move the midpoint a little bit more towards the center. I'll go ahead and click OK. Next, I change this blending mode down to overlay. And what that does is it takes the 50% gray area and it makes that see-through. And then anything that's dark, it's going to darken over the image. And then if anything in here were white or light, then it would brighten that area. I only really have black and gray in this image, so it's really just going to add some darkness to the edges. But this is a little too intense, so I'm going to reduce the opacity of this layer. So I'll just slide that layer opacity down at about 48 or 50%. And let me see a quick preview, and I think that's looking pretty good there. And then last but not least, I'm going to add an Orton effect, which is going to, again, subtly intensify those colors and also add a little bit more brightness to the photo. I'm going to start out by merging a brand new stamped layer and adding it to the top of my layers panel. And I do that by using the keyboard shortcut, Command-Option-Shift-E. And for PC users, that's going to be Control-Alt-Shift-E. I'm going to go up to Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur. I'll give it a good amount of blur. 45 or 50% is going to be pretty good for this photo. And it's really just going to depend on your image and its resolution on the setting that you choose. I'll click OK. Change the blending mode down to soft light. And if I toggle that, it's pretty intense. So let me drop the opacity here down to about 30%. And I'll toggle that layer on and off once again. And I think for one last layer, I'm just going to add a really quick touch of brightness. So I'm going to click on the brightness and contrast adjustment, increase the brightness just a little bit. It'll even increase that contrast as well. So those are the steps on making a fun tilt shift miniature effect using Photoshop.